The silence in the hallway was heavy, thick with the scent of cheap cleaning products and something else, something metallic, something sharp. It was 3:14 a.m. when the heavy oak door of room 412 clicked shut, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the deserted corridor of the Grandview Hotel. Two figures walked away, their footsteps rhythmic, hurried, yet strangely casual. They didn't look back. They didn't check the lock. They didn't need to. Behind that closed door, lying on the threadbare carpet, was 22-year-old Elena Vance. Her eyes were open, fixed on the flickering fluorescent light of the ceiling. Her breath was shallow, a ragged whistle in the dark. She was paralyzed, her body a prison, but her mind was screaming. She watched the shadows of their shoes disappear under the door gap. She heard the elevator chime. And in that suffocating silence, the most terrifying realization took hold. She was still alive when they left the room, and they knew it. To understand the tragedy of Elena Vance, one must understand the environment that birthed this nightmare. Elena was not a girl who looked for trouble. She was a doctoral student, a quiet achiever with a penchant for classical literature and a habit of over-caffeinating during finals week. But the city of Oakhaven, despite its picturesque name, held a jagged edge under its polished surface. It was a place of stark contrasts, where ivory towers overlooked crumbling tenements. On the night of October 14th, the air was crisp, carrying the scent of dying leaves and impending rain. Elena had been celebrating the completion of her midterms with two people she considered her closest confidants, Marcus Thorne, a fellow researcher with a sharp wit, and Sarah Jenkins, a charismatic socialite. They were the golden trio of the department, or so everyone thought. The Grandview Hotel was an architectural relic, a once grand establishment now reduced to a haunt for transients and those seeking anonymity. Why they chose this place for an after-party remains one of the case's most haunting questions. As they entered the lobby, the CCTV footage, grainy and tinted in a ghostly green, captured a chilling dynamic. Sarah was leading the way, her movements erratic, almost manic. Marcus followed, his hands buried deep in his coat pockets, his gaze fixed on the floor. And Elena? She looked tired. She was leaning slightly on Marcus, her steps heavy. There was no sign of struggle, no outward indication that within 2 hours, this room would become a chamber of horrors. Inside room 412, the atmosphere shifted. The walls were a sickly shade of beige, peeling at the corners, and the air was stagnant. According to forensic reconstruction and later testimonies, the celebration turned dark almost immediately. A bottle of expensive scotch sat on the nightstand, untouched. The tension wasn't fueled by alcohol, but by a long simmering resentment. Elena had recently discovered a discrepancy in Marcus's research data, a fraud that would not only end his career but also implicate Sarah. Elena, ever the moral compass, insisted on coming clean. Marcus, driven by a desperate ambition, saw his entire world collapsing. Sarah, whose reputation was her only currency, saw Elena not as a friend, but as a leak that needed to be plugged. The room became a pressure cooker. The neighbors in room 410 later reported hearing muffled thuds and a sound like breaking glass. The physical altercation was brief but brutal. A heavy glass ashtray was the primary weapon. The first blow caught Elena by surprise, striking the temple. She didn't fall immediately. She staggered, reaching out for Sarah, perhaps for help, or perhaps in a final act of trust. Sarah pushed her back. The second blow, delivered by Marcus, sent her to the floor. But here is where the narrative turns from a crime of passion into a cold-blooded execution of intent. Elena wasn't dead. The impact had caused a subarachnoid hemorrhage, a slow bleed in the brain. She was conscious, but her motor functions were severed. She was locked in. For the next 45 minutes, Marcus and Sarah did something unthinkable. They didn't flee in a panic. They didn't call 911. They sat. They sat on the edge of the twin beds and discussed what to do next while Elena lay 3 feet away watching them. Forensic analysts found Sarah's fingerprints on a glass of water she poured for herself while watching Elena's chest rise and fall. Marcus paced the room, occasionally stopping to look down at his friend. At one point, he even adjusted her head with a pillow, not out of mercy, but to prevent blood from pooling too visibly. "She's still breathing," Sarah had whispered. The audio from a nearby baby monitor in the adjacent room, which inadvertently picked up fragments of their conversation, captured Marcus's chilling response. "It's better this way. If she dies later, it looks like an accident. If we help her now, we go to jail." They waited for the life to drain out of her, but Elena's will to live was stubborn. Her heart kept beating, a rhythmic defiance against the betrayal. Eventually, the cold pragmatism of the killers won over their patience. They decided to leave. They wiped down the surfaces they had touched, avoiding the area where Elena lay. They straightened their clothes, checked the hallway through the peephole, and walked out. They left the lights on. They left her in the brilliance of that flickering bulb, alone with the sound of her own struggling breath. When the maid discovered Elena the following morning at 10 a.m., she was still alive. Barely. She would spend 3 days in a coma before succumbing to her injuries, never regaining the ability to speak. But Elena Vance left a witness behind that Marcus and Sarah hadn't accounted for: her smartwatch. The device had recorded her heart rate throughout the entire ordeal. It showed the spike during the argument, the catastrophic drop during the assault, and the agonizingly slow, steady rhythm during the 45 minutes she was left alone. Most importantly, it synced with the hotel's Wi-Fi, providing a timestamped log of exactly when the room became silent. Detective Elias Vance, a veteran of the Oak Haven PD, knew something was wrong the moment he saw the crime scene. It was too clean, he later noted. People who commit crimes of passion leave a mess. This felt like a curated exhibit. The breakthrough came when the police recovered Sarah's deleted search history from that night. How long does it take for a head injury to become fatal? And can autopsy detect a delayed call for help? The defense tried to argue that the duo panicked, that they believed Elena was already beyond help. They claimed it was a tragic accident followed by a moment of human weakness. But the prosecution had a trump card. They brought in a medical expert who testified that had an ambulance been called within the first 30 minutes, Elena Vance had a 90% chance of a full recovery. They didn't leave her because they thought she was dead. They left her to ensure she would be. The trial was a media circus. Marcus Thorne collapsed during the reading of the medical reports. Sarah Jenkins remained a mask of icy indifference. Both were eventually convicted of second-degree murder and conspiracy. But the legal victory felt hollow to Elena's family. The haunting detail that she was alive, watching her friends plan her demise. It was a trauma that no prison sentence could heal. Today, room 412 of the Grandview Hotel is permanently locked. Guests in nearby rooms still complain of a strange sensation, a feeling of being watched, a phantom sound of a ragged breath. The She Was Alive case remains a cornerstone of criminal psychology, revealing the terrifying thinness of the veil between friendship and predatory survival. The deeper the investigation went, the more the investigators realized that Marcus and Sarah hadn't just made a split-second decision. They had spent months cultivating a relationship built on a foundation of lies and academic theft. Marcus's thesis, hailed as groundbreaking, was entirely built on Elena's uncredited labor. He had stolen her hard drives, manipulated her findings. Sarah, for her part, had been funneling money from a nonprofit she managed into Marcus's personal accounts, effectively laundering funds through the university's research grants. Elena had stumbled upon a digital ledger on a shared drive. Just 48 hours before her death. The after-party was never a celebration. It was an ambush. The level of premeditation revealed during the discovery phase of the trial shocked even the most cynical detectives. They found that Sarah had visited the Grandview Hotel 3 days prior to the murder, scouting for a room. A room that was far from the main elevator and had no balcony. She had specifically requested a room with thick walls, claiming she was a light sleeper who needed absolute silence for her meditation retreat. The coldness of this planning suggested a psychopathic detachment. During the trial's most intense moments, the prosecution played the heart rate recordings from Elena's smartwatch. As the jury watched the red line of her pulse spike, and then plateau into a slow, rhythmic thud, the air in the courtroom became suffocating. The data showed that for 32 minutes, Elena's heart rate stayed at a level that indicated she was trying to calm herself. A physiological response to extreme psychological trauma. She wasn't just dying. She was fighting to remain conscious, perhaps hoping that anyone would walk through that door. The digital forensics expert testified that Sarah's phone had been active during those 45 minutes of waiting. She wasn't just sitting there. She was browsing social media, checking her bank balance, and even responding to a text from her mother about Sunday brunch. The juxtaposition of such mundane activities with the dying gasps of her best friend painted a picture of a woman entirely devoid of empathy. Marcus, on the other hand, had spent those minutes searching for legal definitions, clearly trying to formulate his defense strategy before the body was even cold. The prosecution argued that this wasn't a case of panic, but a case of calculated risk management. They weighed the value of Elena's life against the risk of their own exposure, and decided that her silence was more valuable than her survival. The public reaction was one of pure outrage. Protests formed outside the courthouse, with people holding candles and wearing digital watch faces as a symbol of the witness that finally spoke for Elena. The case sparked a national conversation about academic integrity and the pressures of high-stakes research. But for most, it was simply a story of ultimate betrayal. In the final days of the trial, a letter was produced that Elena had written to her parents, but never mailed. In it, she expressed her growing suspicion of Marcus and her fear that she was being pushed out of the department. She wrote, "I thought we were a team, but sometimes I feel like I'm just a ladder for them to climb." This letter became the emotional core of the sentencing hearing. The judge, visibly shaken by the details of the crime, handed down the maximum possible sentence, stating that the act of leaving a living person to die in a dark room was a cruelty that defies the boundaries of human understanding. After the verdict, the Oakhaven community tried to move on, but the shadow of room 412 lingered. The university established a scholarship in Elena's name, focusing on ethical research and student mental health. Yet the students often spoke of her in hushed tones, as if she were still a presence in the library stacks. The Grandview Hotel saw its business plummet, eventually leading to its closure and subsequent demolition. On the day the building was leveled, a crowd gathered to watch the beige walls of room 412 turn to dust. Many felt it was the only way to finally let Elena rest. Yet the questions remain. How many more stories are hidden behind the closed doors of respectable institutions? How often do we truly know the people we call our friends? The case of Elena Vance is a chilling testament to the fact that the most dangerous monsters aren't the ones under our beds, but the ones sitting across from us at the dinner table. They are the ones who smile at our successes, who offer us a drink when we're tired, and who, when the lights go out, might just be waiting for the silence to become permanent. As we look back at the evidence, the timelines, and the digital footprints, we are left with the haunting image of those last 45 minutes. A young woman, full of potential, lying on a cold floor while her world faded to black. She was alive when they left. And in that agonizing interval, she saw the true faces of the people she loved. And that, perhaps, was the most painful wound of all. If this story has left you questioning the reality of the people around you, you are not alone. The world is full of case files that challenge our perception of safety and loyalty. We must remain vigilant, not just for the shadows in the street, but for the shadows in the hearts of those we trust. Elena's watch stopped ticking that night, but her story continues to serve as a warning. What would you have done if you were the one who found the ledger? Would you have confronted them in that hotel room? Or would you have walked away before the door could click shut? The choices we make in the heat of the moment define who we are. But the choices we make in the cold, calculated silence define what we are capable of becoming. Marcus and Sarah chose their future over Elena's life. And in doing so, they lost everything. The legacy of room 412 is not one of academic achievement or social status, but of a profound and irreversible darkness. As the dust settled on the demolition site, a small memorial was left behind. A single classical literature book, its pages fluttering in the wind. It was a tribute to the girl who loved words, who believed in the truth, and who was ultimately silenced by the very people who claimed to be her friends. May her story never be forgotten. And may it remind us all that life is fragile, trust is earned, and the truth, no matter how deeply buried, will always find a way to the surface. What do you think was the true motive behind such a cold-blooded decision? Was it purely fear, or was there a deeper, more sinister resentment at play? Let me know your theories in the comments below. If you found this deep dive into the dark case files chilling, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon. We uncover the stories the world tries to forget, one mystery at a time. Stay vigilant, because the truth is often darker than fiction. Would you like me to investigate another specific true crime case, or perhaps write a script focusing on a cold case that was recently solved by DNA?